In the name of the Father, and of the Son, and of the Holy Spirit. 21 years ago, I went to some kind of an event. I don't have any idea now what the event was, but it came with a swag bag. That's really all I remember about the event was the swag bag, and one object in particular. I remember the object because it sat on my desk for at least 10 years, and then I put it in a drawer. I don't know where it is now. I might still have it, I'm not quite sure, but it really doesn't matter because I remember it so clearly. I can just see this thing. It was a thick pad of sticky notes, 3M sticky notes. It was white, and on all four sides of it was printed the logo of the company that sponsored the event. And on each of the individual sticky notes, there was the logo of the company that sponsored the event. And I kept it because I liked the logo. It was bright and modern and geometric, and I just liked looking at it there on my desk. That company was called Altria. And I didn't know what they made. I just knew that I liked their logo. And then one day, sitting at my desk, trying to avoid work, I Googled Altria. And I discovered that Altria is Philip Morris. Altria is Philip Morris. Altria makes cigarettes. So after that, every time I looked at that stack of sticky notes there on my desk, I wondered who in the world would invest in a company like Altria. And I thought, as a matter of simple logic, that if you did invest in Altria, then you would want people to smoke. And if you invested in Altria, you really couldn't care that it might kill them, or you'd at least, I would think, have to pretend that you didn't know that you were investing in people killing themselves. So, years ago, 5-6 years ago, Dean Daniel pointed out to me that I was completely mishearing what Jesus has to say to us today in the gospel passage we've just read. I thought Jesus was saying that where your heart is, there your treasure will be also. In other words, I thought Jesus was saying that people will invest in what really matters to them, that people will invest in what really matters to them. Where your heart is, there your treasure will be also. But in fact, as Dean Daniel pointed out to me, that is the opposite of what Jesus is actually saying. He is saying, where your treasure is, there your heart will be also. Follow the money, the saying goes. You all know the phrase, follow the money. And that's exactly what Jesus is saying. That is the very thing he's saying. Your heart will follow your money. Your heart will follow your investments. And that's the thing with Altria. If you sock a lot of money into Altria, then it's hard to see how you would not also want people to smoke. Seeing people smoke on the street will make you feel secure financially. Your heart will follow your investment. Your heart will follow your treasure. So if your heart will follow your treasure, I guess the question really is, where do you want your heart to end up? And treasure, our treasure, is not just our money. Our treasure is everything in our life that we have to invest. It's money, of course it's money, but it's also our time and our energy and our focus and all sorts of social capital. All of that is our treasure. And the more you invest any of it, the more your life will get wrapped up in the thing you're investing in. The more you invest, the more your heart, which is your emotions and your thinking and your behavior, all of that, the more you invest, the more your heart will follow. Exactly 6 months before I was born, when dinosaurs roamed the earth, a social psychologist at MIT, Leon Festinger was his name, published a book called When Prophecy Fails. When Prophecy Fails was about a doomsday cult that predicted the end of the world by flood in December 1954. Alien space creatures were going to flood the world, but they were going to save in a flying saucer true believers. Well, of course, the prophecy failed. There was no flood. There was no flying saucer. And you would think, wouldn't you, that the believers then would just have admitted that they were wrong and mourned their loss and moved on. But the opposite is actually what happened to many of them. Many of them doubled down. They claimed that superior beings from outer space indeed were about to flood the earth in December 1954, but it was their devotion, their firm belief in the outer space creatures that convinced the outer space creatures not to do it. And so far from giving up on what they believed, they began proselytizing. They tried to win more and more people into their movement. Not everyone, only some of the believers did this. And Festinger, in his book, lists various characteristics of the people who simply were so committed that they couldn't give it up in the face of evidence. And one of those markers was the people who had invested the most were the ones who could give it up the least. The more they had invested in practical terms, like money and time, some of them had lost relationships over this, they'd given up their careers, the more they had invested, the more likely they were to be truly committed. Their hearts and their minds had followed their investment, and the more they had invested, the more they believed. So, Altria, outer space doomsday cults, you might be thinking that this is all just a terrible dynamic. I mean, this dynamic of the heart following the investment. But it's not a terrible dynamic. It's just the way life is. It's just the way the human mind works. And that dynamic of the heart following the investment, that can be used for good or for ill. So think of this. In our culture, we think that romantic love has to precede making a marital investment in someone. The love comes and then the investment. We believe that where your heart is, there your treasure will be. That you should invest in the person you love. But study after study has shown that doing it the other way around works just as well and may even work better. When two families arrange a marriage, arrange a good marriage, not a sick, damaging marriage, but when two families arrange a good marriage, it seems that the investment the two people make in one another leads to love. At least as much love as there is in marriages based on romantic attraction. And again, I'm not talking about sick arranged marriages. I'm talking about marriages that are arranged for the good of the two people and the good of the culture and the good of the two families. And often, when these two people begin to tend one another, to care for one another, then love comes. The marriage might begin as a legal contract, but then, through mutual tending, it evolves into a personal bond. The investment of treasure, time and money and energy, and giving up, those two people giving up their autonomy, the investment in the marriage moves the heart. All of which is to say, you have to be careful about what you invest in. You have to choose it carefully and well. Because what you invest in will eventually become what you care about. Where your treasure is, there your heart will be also. The heart follows the treasure. The mind follows the treasure. And the soul follows the treasure. So, how do you choose what you're going to invest in? How does this dance begin if love is not where it begins, but where it ends? One of the ways it begins is when we see how much something has transformed someone else. When we see what joy it's brought them. When we see what kind of a person it has made them. And so we invest in it too. We invest because we have hope that that can happen to us too. We invest our treasure, and we wait, and we hope. Most of the time, that's how the spiritual life works. That's how life in God works. We don't begin this journey by loving God. We begin this journey by wanting to love God. So we invest, and we wait, and we hope. Thomas Merton, many of you, most of you know Thomas Merton. Thomas Merton was a Trappist monk. He was a monk of the Abbey of Our Lady of Gethsemane in Kentucky. He was converted to Christianity and baptized at Corpus Christi Roman Catholic Church just north of here on 121st Street, in this very neighborhood. In this very neighborhood, Thomas Merton met and fell in love with Jesus. But he wasn't really interested in Christianity to start with. He certainly was not interested in Jesus. Thomas Merton thought he wanted to be a Buddhist. And he got himself a Buddhist teacher. But the Buddhist teacher sent him in search of Jesus. So he went to Corpus Christi. He did not know at all what he was getting himself into. But he invested. He invested his time, and he invested his mind, and he immersed himself in a world he knew nothing about. And he fell in love with Jesus. And what happened at Corpus Christi Church led Thomas Merton to the truly heroic life of Cistercian monasticism. Merton invested because a wise person told him to. And then he fell in love. The Buddhist teacher was an investment counselor of sorts. And Thomas Merton found himself in an arranged marriage. So Merton, the famous Christian writer, began his Christian life by investing in someone he had never met. And his investment turned to love. Where your treasure is, there your heart will be also. So the question we all have to answer is this: where do you want your heart to end up? I've heard people say that they come to church, but they can't say the creed because they don't believe all of it. I don't say it because I believe it. I say it because I want to believe it. And I know I'm not alone here. The question is, where do you want your heart to end up? I've heard people say that they can't offer the peace to people they don't love. What if we were to offer the peace not because we necessarily mean it, but because we want to mean it? The question is, where do you want your heart to end up? The church is not a place for people who believe. The church is a place for people who want to believe, who have decided to invest in the hope of coming one day to believe. The church is not a place for people who love one another. The church is a place for people who have decided to invest in the hope of one day loving one another and loving all God's children. As Luke's Jesus said to us today, where your treasure is, there your heart will be also. So the question is, where do you want your heart to end up? We come to the Lord's table. Week after week we come. We do not come because our hearts are always in it. I can speak to you only for myself, but I can confess to you that what this table asks of me is not something I am always ready to give. It's not always what I want, what this table asks of me. But I want to want it. I want my heart to be in it. And so we come here. Even on a day as hot as this, we come, and we hope that our meager investment will drag our hearts along. Where your treasure is, the Lord Jesus says, there your heart will be also. So we come here. We come here and we say the words, and we do the deeds, and we make the investment. And we hope that our hearts and minds will follow to that place we want them one day to be.